Keth had done this 43 times. He reminded himself of that number as the boarding craft locked against the freighter's airlock with a dull, satisfying thunk. 43 seizures. 43 crews who had looked at the weapons, looked at his team, and made the smart decision. Cargo in exchange for lives. Simple arithmetic that even the dimmest species eventually understood. He checked his sidearm out of habit, not necessity. Passive scan clean? He asked. Clean. Dross, his tech specialist, didn't look up from his board. No weapons signatures. No distrizveakon. They killed their transponder when we lit them up, but that's just instinct. Same as a sandcrawler pulling into its shell. Behind Keth, the 8 members of his boarding party ran their final checks. Veterans, most of them, ran with their shock baton. Foss and his brother Callow, who had never once needed to fire their rifles on a job. Mig, who was 17 and still impressed by the uniforms. Keth had taken worse teams through harder seizures. He glanced at the manifest on his wrist display. Meridian Hall, registered out of the Tessian Drift, cargo class, independently operated. 14 crew, mixed species, the way frontier ships usually ran, a little of everything, bound together by the economics of deep haul work. 14 crew against 9 armed boarders. What species are humans again? Mig asked, checking his own display. The soft ones, Wren said, not unkindly. Bipedal, fragile bone structure. They're traders, mostly. Explorers. They don't have a military culture the way the Veth do, nothing like the hive aggression of the Bren. She glanced at Keth. We'll be back on the ship in 20 minutes. Keth nodded. Umans nawutieta. It's practically instinct with them. They'll calculate the odds, realize they're bad, and open the conversation. Be polite. Don't point weapons unless someone does something stupid. The airlock hissed open. The first thing Keth noticed was the corridor. He had boarded dozens of ships, haulers, pleasure crafts, a Veth military courier once, which had been the only time he had genuinely feared for his life. Freighters were usually generous with their interior space, wide cargo thoroughfares designed for loaders and lifters and the movement of bulk goods. Meridian Hall was not like that. The corridor beyond the airlock was narrow. Not impossibly so. He could walk without turning sideways, but narrow enough that 2 people could not pass each other comfortably. The ceiling was low, the walls close, conduit and piping running exposed along every surface. Hand grip rails lined both sides at varying heights, worn smooth and dark from long use. Odd design, Dross muttered, stepping in behind him. Old ship, Keth said. Pre-standardization, probably. He told himself that. He kept walking. The corridor branched ahead, left toward the cargo bays, right toward crew quarters and the bridge. Standard sweep. Split the team, secure both directions, meet at the bridge. He had done it in his sleep. Wren, take Foss, Callow, and Mig. Cargo bay sweep, report in every 2 minutes. He gestured the others forward. The rest with me. Wren nodded and peeled off. Her team's footsteps faded quickly. The corridor's swallowed sound strangely here. Not the echo he expected from a metal hull, but something flatter, more absorbed. Like the walls were listening. Stop it, Keth told himself. 43 times. He moved toward the bridge. They found no one. Not in the first stretch of corridor. Not in the small mess room they passed, which had chairs still pulled out from a recent meal. A cup of something warm and dark still steaming on the table. Someone had been here minutes ago. The food processors were still running. Music played faintly from a speaker mounted near the ceiling. A low, rhythmic human composition, percussion-heavy, almost meditative. They're hiding, said Vass, one of his veterans, with mild contempt. Let them hide, Keth said. The bridge is all we need. But he slowed anyway, because something was pulling at his attention and he couldn't name it. He stopped and looked back down the corridor they had come through. Looked at the handrails, at the way the conduit pipes were positioned, not just routed for function, but arranged almost like they created natural handholds at regular intervals. At the low ceiling that would force anyone moving fast to duck, to commit to a line, to lose options. At the blast door behind them, which he had walked through without thinking about. It was open. Of course it was open. He turned back toward the bridge and kept walking. Keth, Ren's voice in his earpiece, quieter than expected. Go ahead. We're the first cargo bay. It's a pause. It's staged. What do you mean staged? I mean the cargo is real. I'm reading standard manifested goods, industrial equipment, food stocks, but the way it's arranged. The containers aren't stacked for efficiency. They're arranged in rows, with gaps between them. Another pause, longer, like corridors. Keth stopped walking. Like corridors, he repeated. Narrow ones. He stood very still in the passageway and listened to the music drifting from the mess room behind him and thought about a crew of 14 who had seen a pirate ship decloak off their port side and had not run, had not signaled, had not done anything that 43 previous crews had done, who had simply gone quiet and waited. Ren, he said carefully, fall back to the junction. Regroup with. The blast door at the end of the corridor closed. Not slowly, not with the grinding reluctance of old hydraulics. It snapped shut, a heavy industrial seal dropping into place with a sound like a gunshot, and the lights in the corridor shifted. Still on, but dimmer, overlaid now with a faint red tint that made the shadows deeper and the walls feel closer. Contact! Callow's voice, suddenly loud. Then static. Then nothing. Callow. Keth's hand went to his sidearm. Callow, report. Silence. Ren. A breath. Then, we have a situation. There were 4 of them with Keth, Dross, Vass, Pelk, and Sean. Good fighters. He reminded himself of that the way he had reminded himself of 43, because it was the kind of thing that needed repeating now. Options, Vass said. His voice was steady. Keth appreciated that. The blast door controls will be manually overridden from a secondary panel somewhere on this corridor. Dross was already moving to the walls, running his scanner along the conduit lines. Give me 2 minutes. We don't have 2. The human appeared at the far end of the corridor, just standing there. Keth's party had weapons up in an instant, for sidearms trained on a single figure backlit by the reddish light. A human, medium height, heavy set in the way of people who did physical work, wearing the rough utility clothing of a freight worker. Arms at his sides. No visible weapon. He did not put his hands up. He did not speak. He just looked at them with an expression that Keth could not immediately parse. Not fear, not aggression, not the wide-eyed calculation of someone working out a negotiation. Something calmer than any of those things. Something that looked, if Keth was being honest with himself, almost like patience. Crew of the Meridian Hall, Keth said, keeping his voice level, command tone, the voice that ended confrontations before they started. We are not here to harm you. Stand down, and we can discuss. There are 3 of them behind you, the human said. Kid Spoon. He would think about the next 4 minutes for the rest of his life. Not because of the violence itself. He had seen violence, had committed it when the job required it, wore the weight of it the way anyone in his profession eventually did. He would think about those 4 minutes because of what the violence felt like. Because nothing about it matched anything he had been trained to expect. The 3 humans who came from the side passage, a maintenance access, a gap in the wall his scan had logged as a conduit channel, did not come the way fighters came. No combat stance, no challenge posture, no moment of sizing up and squaring off. They came the way a pressure seal blows. Instantly, completely, with total commitment to a single direction, as if hesitation was a concept they had never been introduced to. Close quarters. That was the thing. The corridor was 1 body wide. His weapons meant nothing. By the time any of them could raise and fire without risking hitting each other, the humans were already inside the distance, where firearms become problems rather than solutions. Vass went down first, a strike to the throat, efficient and devastating, that dropped him before he made a sound. Pelk managed to fire once, the shot sparking off the ceiling in a shower of light, before something caught his wrist and redirected his entire body sideways into the wall with a force that did not seem possible from a creature of that size and build. Keth fought. He was good at fighting. He caught one of them across the jaw with his elbow, a solid hit, and felt the impact travel wrong. Too much resistance, like hitting a bulk cargo loader, and then he was on the floor without fully understanding how he had arrived there. And the human who had hit him was already moving toward Dross with the same unhurried efficiency. They fought dirty. No, that wasn't right. They didn't fight dirty. They just didn't fight the way anyone with a code fought. No acknowledgement of threat display. No pause for response. No moment of performance. Just immediate, total, savage efficiency. Every movement aimed at ending the problem as fast as possible, using elbows and knees and whatever the corridor offered, the handrails and the low ceiling and the geometry of the space itself, all somehow part of the calculation. The human at the far end of the corridor had not moved, was still standing there, still watching with that patient expression. "Stop," he said, and something about the single word, the quietness of it, the complete absence of theatrics, cut through the noise the way a klaxon can't. Everything stopped. Keth breathed from the floor. His team breathed. 2 of them were down. Dross was holding his scanner like it had betrayed him, a thin cut across his forehead, leaking something dark. Sean was against the wall, one arm held at a careful angle that suggested it was not operating correctly. For minutes. "You should call your other people," the human said. "Tell them to stop moving." It took Keth 3 attempts to key as calm his hands were not doing what he told them. "Ren, stand down." A long silence. Then, say again, "Stand down." He looked at the human at the end of the corridor. "We're standing down." Another silence. Then, quietly, in a register he had never heard from Ren before, "Keth, they have Mig." He closed his eyes. "Open them." "Is he alive?" "Yes." "Then stand down." What came back over the comm was not words. It was a sound, brief and small, that he had heard from himself once, years ago, in a situation that had also turned out to be not what he had expected. It was the sound of a number you'd been counting on, a certainty, a margin, a professional assessment of odds, turning out to be wrong in a way that changed something permanently. The human walked toward them slowly, hands still at his sides. Up close, he was older than Keth had first estimated. Lines deep around the eyes, gray threaded through his hair, the kind of face that had been outdoors in difficult conditions for a long time. He moved with the unhurried ease of someone who knew this space completely. Every handhold and corner and low beam a known quantity. He stopped a few feet from Keth and looked him over. Not with cruelty, with something more like assessment, the way you look at a problem you have already solved and are now simply documenting. How many shifts have you taken?" he asked. "That isn't your concern. I'm not asking to threaten you." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm asking because you thought this was routine. You came in talking about negotiation. You told your crew, we don't have a military culture." Keth said nothing. "You weren't entirely wrong," the human said. "We don't have a military culture. We have about 40 of them, depending on which part of Earth you're from and which century you're looking at. We've been fighting each other in close quarters since before we had metal. Since before we had words, probably." He glanced along the corridor, at the handrails, at the low ceiling, at the blast door that had closed so definitively. "We built this ship ourselves. Second-hand frame, full interior refit. You want to know what the primary design requirement was?" Keth waited. Every corridor had to be too narrow to engage more than one attacker at a time. The human said it the way you state a simple engineering principle. No drama, no pride, just fact. "We haul cargo for a living. We also know the lanes we haul it through. And we know the kind of people who operate out here." He looked at Keth steadily. "You are not the first." "The manifest," Keth said. His voice came out more level than he expected. "The crew categories. The humans were listed under security. Some of us, yes." He shrugged. "The others have other skills. But everyone on a long-haul ship learns to handle themselves. You have a great deal of time in transit." A brief pause, and a great deal of history to draw from. They took the weapons. They took the boarding craft's navigation core. They took nothing else. No cargo. No hostages. No prisoners. They put Ket's team back in the boarding craft and cycled the airlock behind them. And as the craft drifted free of the freighter's hull, the last thing Keth saw through the porthole was the human standing in the open airlock, watching them go. He didn't wave. He didn't gesture, didn't speak, didn't perform any of the victory displays Keth would have expected from someone who had just done what he had done. He simply stood and watched with that geological patience until the distance grew too great and his figure blurred and Meridian Hall turned slowly in the dark and continued on her way. as if nothing particularly unusual had happened, as if this were simply a thing they had prepared for, and now it was done, and there was cargo to deliver. The debrief lasted 2 hours. Keth answered every question. He filed a report in full. He watched his captain's expression move through skepticism, confusion, and something approaching alarm, and he answered every follow-up with flat precision, because the only way through it was through it. He mentioned the handrails. He mentioned the cargo arranged in corridors within the cargo bay. He mentioned the blast doors and the timing and the way the acoustics of the corridors had seemed designed to flatten sound, to take away the spatial information that fighters rely on to track each other. He mentioned the engineer he had glimpsed just once in the cargo bay, small, barely larger than a juvenile Tessian, grease-stained, wearing an expression of focused calm, who had, according to Foss's account, cornered 2 experienced fighters in a container gap and solved the problem with a length of pipe and the complete absence of any fear Foss could detect in her body language. Not suppressed fear, not adrenaline-masked fear, simply no fear, as if the situation was well within the parameters of what she had planned for. When it was over, he sat alone in the ship's common room and drank something that wasn't quite strong enough and thought about a species that had looked at a pirate ship decloaking off their port side and had gone, quietly, to their positions. Not because they were fearless, but because they had already thought about this, had already built for it, had already run the corridors in their heads 100 times, already knew every sealed bulkhead and maintenance hatch, already had the geometry of confrontation memorized in their muscles. We have a great deal of time in transit, and a great deal of history to draw from. He thought about all the manifests in the drift, all the ships listed as unarmed freighters, all the transponders that had gone quiet when a pirate vessel decloaked off the port side. He thought about how you would never be able to tell, not from a scan, not from silhouette, not from any exterior indicator at all, which ones had done what Meridian Hall had done, which ones had rebuilt their interiors, which ones were crewed by a species carrying 40 military cultures in their generational memory, for whom a long transit was not empty time, but preparation. He thought about what the young one, Mig, had looked like when they put him back on the ship, the specific quality of his silence. Some things don't need to be explained to be understood. Keth put down his drink and went to find his captain. 3 weeks later, in a planning session in a port that didn't have an official name, someone flagged the Meridian Hall on a routing projection. Viable target, same corridor, same schedule, predictable course. Keth stood up. The room held 9 people, all veterans, none of them given to alarm. They were not people who frightened easily, and most of them had seen Keth in difficult situations and knew what his baseline looked like, which was why, when he stood and they saw his face, the room went quiet. He talked for a long time. He left nothing out. He described the corridor width and the blast doors and the handrails worn smooth from use. He described the cargo bay configured as a maze of kill corridors. He described 4 minutes from the inside, what it felt like to be good at something and have that stop matching, to have all your numbers turn wrong simultaneously. He described the human in the airlock, watching them drift away, patient as geology, recording nothing and forgetting nothing. When he finished, no one spoke for a while. Then the newest one in the room, young, still shiny with the confidence of someone who hadn't had a genuinely hard job yet, said quietly, "But it was just a freighter." Keth looked at him for a long moment. "That's what we thought," he said. The notice spread through the informal channels of the drift over the following months, passed through encrypted boards, whispered in docking bays, scratched in marker on the inside walls of certain station bathrooms that served certain kinds of clientele. It had no official author, no explanation, no context or caveat or exception, just a single line. Do not board human vessels. Any class. Most people who encountered it didn't know the story behind it, but they read any class, no exceptions, no minimum size or armament threshold, no carve-outs for obviously civilian craft, and something in the completeness of that warning, the flat totality of it, reached the part of the brain that had evolved to pay attention to that particular tone. Most of them followed the advice. The ones who didn't generally only needed to make that decision once. Out on the frontier lanes, the freighters still run. The old cargo ships with the worn handrails and the narrow corridors and the blast doors that close very fast. They carry no visible weapons. They travel without escorts. They do not look from the outside like anything to be afraid of. The crews inside them have a great deal of time in transit. They use it well. This is by design the last thing you will ever think about them.